Dublin is the home of stout, and Dubliners are famous for making it and drinking it. The pub is still the centre of social life in Dublin. And in some of the pubs, folk singers like Bob Lynch play and sing the traditional songs.
From singles and a bow, unto me pay attention. Don't ever fall in love, 'tis the devil's own invention. Once I fell in love with a maiden so bewitching, Miss Henrietta Bell, out of Captain Kelly's kitchen. Now with me toodle-oodle-eye, me toodle-oodle-laddie, me toodle-oodle-eye, and me toodle-oodle-laddie.
Stout is said to taste better in Dublin than anywhere else in the world. I haven't drunk it very often, but this certainly isn't the occasion to refuse. Well, I like the froth, but I'm not too sure about what comes underneath it. Well, I'm assured that this comes from water from a fresh stream just outside Dublin, and that it's piped into the city, especially to the brewery. Well, I'm very glad to hear that, because this is sometimes called Liffey water, and lovely though Dublin's river looks, I certainly wouldn't like to drink the water.
She handed tea and cake, and I ate while I was able.
The Liffey flows through the heart of Dublin. It reminded me of my visit to Paris and the Seine. It's broad and majestic with great trees along its banks and has fine bridges, 12 of them in all. The Liffey, more than anything else, has led to Dublin being nicknamed the Paris of the North. But as well as this, Dublin has many wide, stately and tree-lined streets. The most famous is O'Connell Street, with its statues of Irish heroes in a row down the middle. Halfway along stands the General Post Office, the GPO, a building with a special place in Irish history. Dublin is a port, and ships come right up into the centre of the city. Like Paris, Dublin has a huge traffic problem. It's just as noisy and dense. Many people prefer to walk, and one of the bridges is reserved for pedestrians only. It's called Halfpenny Bridge because of a toll levied on it years ago. Just as in Britain, the old halfpenny disappeared in Ireland when the coinage was decimalised. In Ireland, you can use both British and Irish coins because the Irish ones are exactly the same size and shape as ours. But when you look at them closely, you realise that the symbols on them are quite different. For instance, on the halfpenny, the 1 penny and the 2 penny, there are Celtic designs. And on the 5 penny, there's a bull, which represents Irish agriculture. The 10 penny has a salmon on it, and in Irish legend that means wisdom. The 50 penny has a woodcock, because that's a very shy, elusive bird, which is loved by all Irish sportsmen. And on the back, they all have the harp. The harp is the national symbol of Ireland, so it's not surprising there are quite a few of them around the capital city. In the Irish language, Dublin is called Boilia O'Haclí, which means literally town with a ford of hurdles, and it results from Dublin's first settlers, the Vikings. These invaders from Scandinavia were attacking Scotland, England, the north of France and Ireland, and when they arrived here they looked for a place with a river crossing to start their simple community. Over the centuries the settlement grew to a town, and the town to Dublin City. In some parts of Dublin, especially Oxman's Town, Viking names survive in the street signs. All over Ireland, as well as Dublin, signposts and notices on public buildings are in Irish as well as English. The Irish language is spoken in parts of Ireland, but I didn't hear much of it in Dublin. Lovely.
Thank you.
Can you speak Irish, Bob?
I can speak Irish, but I don't converse in another language, you know.
Can you say something to me in Irish?
Yes, indeed. Many do good. The photo road could be Erin, and it's body all clear.
I think I recognise Boilia O'Haclí there, which means Dublin.
That's
I
right.
didn't understand any of the rest of it.
Means actually you're very welcome to Ireland and Dublin, and God's blessing upon you.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.
We have another song.
Can indeed, yes.
Dublin's fair city, where the girls are so pretty. I first laid my eyes on sweet Molly Malone, as she wheeled her wheelbarrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh.
Molly Malone, the heroine of Dublin's famous folk song, was a celebrated cockle seller. The very street where the old lady had her stall is still there in the heart of Dublin. I didn't actually see any cockles and mussels, but there was an old lady with a wheelbarrow. In the evening, Molly Malone sold cockles outside the theatres to actors and theatre-goers, which was how she became well known. But though popular, she was always poor and cold, and one winter morning they found her dead, her body huddled up on the street.
Now a ghost wheels her barrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh, oh, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, crying cockles and mussels.
It was from here, the harbour at Howth, a small port on the edge of Dublin, that Molly Malone came to stock up her wheelbarrow with cockles and mussels. Today, Howth is still a small port, and it's a very attractive one, busy with sailing boats and fishermen. It's a natural harbour set in the coast of a rocky peninsula that forms part of the great curve of Dublin Bay. And Howth Peninsula is an historic part of Dublin. The descendants of the Norman lords who conquered it long ago still live here at Howth Castle. The family is called St. Lawrence, and I visited the present Mr. St. Lawrence to hear the story of Grace O'Malley, a pirate queen who one day with her fleet sailed into Howth harbour. She called at the castle and requested food and drink, which was refused. Furious, she captured the son and heir and held him as a hostage, threatening to kill him unless the family promised that from that day onward they would lay an extra place at the table at every meal and always leave the gate of the castle open. The boy was released, but Grace O'Malley said there would be a curse on the heir if ever they went back on their promise. Today, Mr. St. Lawrence is still ready for the unexpected O'Malley guest.
Well, this is the dining room. I'm sorry, but the extra place hasn't been cleared away.
Oh, you still lay the extra place, do you?
Yes, we always lay the extra place. There's a curse on the heir if it's not laid.
Do you really take it that seriously?
Well, I think you would in the same position. If the curse was on me, well, one could take the risk, but I don't think you'd ever forgive yourself if your son died having not laid it.
So there's never been a time, either at breakfast, lunch or dinner, when you haven't laid that extra place?
No?
Nor as far as you know when your ancestors haven't laid it?
No, I think it's always been laid.
You're not prepared to try once, just not putting it there?
Or would you?
I don't think I would, no. Is it always laid at the head of the table?
No, that varies according to the number of people having a meal. Today at lunch we were 3 people, and the extra place was put at the head of the table. But on other occasions it can be somewhere else.
And you say you never bother to clear it away between meals?
Well, that's very idleness more than anything else.
Lovely, Jean! Come on, Jean!
Hurling, or camogie as the girls' version is called, is a truly Irish game. It's a bit like hockey, but points are scored by hitting the ball under or over the crossbar of the goal.
Come on, Jean!
There seem to be very few rules. There's no offside, you can run with the ball, bouncing it on your stick, and you're even allowed to hold the ball in your hand for 3 paces. Hello.
Hello.
That looked like hot work. Are you all exhausted? The game's got its own sticks and ball, too. The ball's called a schlitter. The girls told me that it's made of cork and leather, and the heavy seams make it easier to hold. Oh, I see. It's not for anything to make it easier to hit or anything like that. Can I have a look at the stick? Oh, it's quite unusual, isn't it? What have you got the sticky tape on this for?
It prevents it from cracking. And if the stick is cracked, you know, it would hold it for some time.
And you've all got different colours, haven't you, to make it look pretty? And how do you actually hit it when you hit it?
Yeah, you just, you know, kind of push like that.
Almost like a golf ball in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see if I can... And any particular way of holding it?
Yeah, your right hand on the top.
Oh, it's very like golf, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that. Right, mind yourselves. You never know, I might get a go. That wasn't too bad. Do you want to try sort of batting it around amongst me and see if we can have a go? You start and I'll see if I can grab it. So you just have to get it for me, Charlotte, dear. Yeah. Ouch! I didn't think I'd make a hurling star, but when experts are in action, hurling is an incredibly fast and skillful game.
Yards out, being chased by Conroe. Oh, what a marvellous robbery that was.
The All-Ireland Hurling Final is an event to match the Cup Final at Wembley. This is Cork versus Kilkenny.
Come after it again. Conroe is gander up, as they say. Getting the ball down to Frank Cummins. Stalemate. Ball breaking out again to Frank Cummins. And Frank, who may hurl his club hurling down in Cork, but he hurls his county hurling for Kilkenny. In now to Ned Byrne. Ned Byrne being hoosed off the ball, and that's a hoosing job if ever there was. Out to John Kinsella. John Kinsella 30 yards out. His puck blocked down by Conroe. Mick Crotty 25 yards out. A shot and it's over the bar.
Parts of Dublin are being redeveloped, old buildings giving way to new. When a site was being cleared for a new civic centre some years ago, the remains of Dublin's first Viking settlement were revealed. When people realised the importance of the find, building work was halted and the whole area handed over to Dublin's leading archaeologist, Breandán O'Riordáin. The men helping with the excavations are not trained archaeologists, but corporation labourers. They normally work on roads and building sites, but over 10 summers they've learnt about archaeology and how to dig delicately. Mr. O'Riordáin prefers them to part-time experts who come and go. I joined Mr. O'Riordáin, who showed me some of the things they've unearthed.
These are all part of houses and workshops belonging to the 12th century. And here you have part of the side wall of a house, posts and also the mud walling which would have cloaked it.
How do you tell what's part of the mud wall and what's just the earth here?
Well, there's a difference between the two. This one is quite sterile and that one contains a lot of habitation refuse, in other words, seeds, hazelnuts and things of that kind.
Yes. Is this one of the largest houses, or would they all have been this size?
This is one of the largest. It measures about 25 feet long by 15 feet wide. It would be the size of a lounge, a modern house. And over here on this side, there is a lot of watling lying on the floor of the house. It may, in fact, have been for bedding, where people slept, or possibly where people sat.
Now, which is the outer wall of the house?
The outer wall is that one there with this very white clay mud on it. And it runs right around here behind us and over in this direction and over there. And then you have the actual doorway of the house with these two great door posts.
Now, what is the watling here that's lying the other side of the wall?
That is probably part of a wattle screen or part of a wall that has fallen and is lying there fully preserved. But you get this both on pathways, on floors, and also as the side walls and partitions in houses.
What exactly is wattle?
Wattle is really basketry, hazelwood which is woven in and out around posts.
Yes. And how many people would have lived in here? Would it have been just one family or would a whole community have shared?
I should imagine just one family. The size of the family, of course, we do not know, but the size of the house you have in the center of the floor here, you have the hearth, so that in fact you would not have all that much room for people. And all you have there now, of course, is the red ash of the fire that was there in the 12th century.
And it went straight up through the ceiling?
Yes, I would think so.
Yes. Let's go and have a look over here. And these are some of the things you found, are they?
Yes, these are some bronze pins, ring-headed bronze pins in some cases, and we have got about 600 of these in the course of the excavations.
What would these have been used for?
These were used as dress pins on cloth.
Did they make these for trade or just for their own use?
Presumably for their own use, and there are also some very fine hairnets as well, which the ladies presumably wore.
And also the ladies obviously looked after their hair.
Yes, they're presumably long-haired wenches combing their hair, because we have got considerable numbers of these combs which are made from deer antler, red deer antler.
And very fine, aren't they? I mean, those combs are just as fine as anything we'd use now.
Yes, they're cut presumably with an iron saw.
And very well preserved, too.
Yes.
Again, would these have been made for trade?
No, I think they were probably for the local population, possibly trade inland in Ireland, whatever about overseas.
And a beautiful shoe, which is obviously a child's shoe, wasn't it?
Yes, this is one of many hundreds of soles of shoes from the 13th century which we have found, and they are cobbler's scrap, a lot of them. This was a child's shoe, and we have many others like it.
And still quite sort of flexible.
Yes, the ground is all waterlogged, with the result that everything is more or less preserved, including the leather and cloth and other objects.
Now, did they lead a fairly comfortable life, or was it still
Yes,
very
I think
primitive?
that when you look at this rather exciting looking jug, which is called a knight jug because there are knights in armour here on the outside, and these knight jugs were brought in from England, from Bristol, in the 13th century for wine. And I think that this shows that certainly there were rich people living in the city of Dublin at that stage, at any rate.
And you look as if you've reconstructed this site.
Yes, we found this in a cesspit. It was thrown away in the 13th century, perhaps broken by some waitress or somebody, and we have repaired it now so that we can put it on display again.
But though the Viking treasures are exciting, even greater works of art have been unearthed in Ireland, and many of them can be seen in Dublin's National Museum. Some of the most precious finds date back to the 8th century, 100 years before the Vikings came to Dublin. One of Ireland's most treasured possessions from those times takes pride of place in the museum. It's called the Ardagh Chalice. It's a silver chalice decorated with bands of very fine gold wire interlaced into very beautiful and intricate patterns. And some people say that if you look very closely at those patterns, you can distinguish the heads of animals and birds. You have to look very closely, and I think I can see them, but I'm not too sure. And set in between those panels of gold filigree are glass studs. Some are just blue with silver in them, and some are blue and red. Just underneath the gold panels of filigree and the glass studs, there's a panel with the apostles' names all the way round the chalice, and they're engraved. They stand out on a background of tiny dots. And underneath, which is rather interesting because you wouldn't see this if the chalice was standing on an altar or a table, underneath, reflected here in the glass panel, is some more very attractive gold work, and right in the middle, a very large, clear rock crystal. Not much is known about the history of the chalice, except that it was used in church services to give wine to the congregations, and that it was found in Ardagh, in County Limerick, in 1868. But Ireland's greatest treasure is not an object made of precious metal, but a book, known as the Book of Kells. The 4 volumes are kept in Dublin's Trinity College, and it's been called the most beautiful book in the world. It's a manuscript of the 4 Gospels, worked in decorated writing by Celtic monks 1,200 years ago. It's written in Latin, and many of the pages are covered in the most delicately coloured and incredibly detailed Celtic designs. The first few words of each Gospel are given a whole page to themselves, and the first letter of the first word forms the basis of the design. My favourite page shows the symbols of the Gospel makers. This one is the winged lion of St. Mark, and this the eagle of St. John. The book was started by Irish monks working in a monastery on the island of Iona off the coast of Scotland. In the middle of the work, the island was invaded by Vikings, and the monks were driven away. They fled back to Ireland, bringing their half-finished book with them, and established a new monastery at a place called Kells. Eventually, the monks finished their masterpiece, and it was known as the Book of Kells. That monastery, too, was attacked, but fortunately, the precious manuscript survived and remained there until 1653, when it was taken to Dublin and eventually given to Trinity College. Book of Kells is famous the world over, and here at Trinity College, Dublin's university, anyone can come and see it in the great library where it's kept. There's another spooky tourist attraction in the tombs beneath St. Michan's church. Because of the unusually dry atmosphere, the bodies in these coffins are still in a state of perfect preservation, even though they've been there for hundreds of years. Visitors to the tombs are shown around by curator Harold Wilmott. It was on a visit to these tombs 100 years ago that a writer got the idea for a horror novel. His name was Bram Stoker, and the novel, Dracula.
Now, these two coffins contain the remains of the brothers Sheares, John and Henry Sheares. They were two Irish patriots who were executed in the year 1798. And after execution, they were brought in here in two coffins and laid in much similar position to where they are now. But already in the vault, when they were brought in, there were a number of other coffins containing bodies, and these bodies are all in a very good state of preservation. On the 100th anniversary of the Sheares brothers' execution, some person brought in a wreath of fresh flowers. There's the remains of the casket there to the right. Soon after the fresh flowers come in, it was noticed that all the bodies in the vault started to decompose. Whatever effect the flowers had on the body's decomposition had set in, and the result was that in 1940 they had to recoffin the whole lot.
Do people really believe that it's a superstition and legend connected with the flowers, or do they think it might be some other
They do think that's what it causes it. Some bacteria, something in the flowers. It takes a very tiny spore of bacteria to start off decay. Once it starts, there is no stopping it.
What about the other vaults?
The other vaults are perfect.
The bodies were still perfect.
Bodies are still perfect, as far as we know. Need to say we don't open coffins to see.
After looking at the coffins, I went upstairs into the church itself to see its famous organ. It was on this organ that a celebrated musician once practiced. That musician was Handel, and Dublin has a famous connection with him. For it was in Dublin, at a music hall that has since disappeared, that his great work, The Messiah, was first performed in 1742. Grand terraces like Merrion Square were built, and eminent Protestants lived in them. British rule of Ireland went back for centuries and was centred on Dublin Castle. For many Irishmen, Dublin Castle symbolised English oppression. In the coat of arms, the harp of Ireland was dominated by the Crown of England, and the figure of Justice over the gate had her back to the city. Irishmen said this signified no justice for the Irish. Over the centuries, one rebellion followed another, and each one was as unsuccessful as the one before. In the last century alone, there were several attempts to throw off English rule. These too failed, and often their leaders were executed. But then in 1916 came a rising which was somehow to be different. One of its leaders was a schoolmaster, Patrick Pearse. He was a slight man with a gift for impassioned oratory. He learnt the spirit of freedom when he was very young, and remembering his youth, he said, "When I was a child of 10, I went down on my bare knees by my bedside one night and promised God that I should devote my life to free my country." And so with these hopes in his heart, he grew up with his family. Patrick Pearse became a headmaster and worked to pass on to his boys the Irish language, Irish traditions and dreams of freedom. A society called the Irish Volunteers had been formed, and Pearse became leader of a section, giving his men arms which had come from Germany. Pearse believed that without arms, Ireland would only become free when it was convenient to England. His men trained in musketry each Friday evening, and the meetings were well attended. This was 1914, and England was at war with Germany. Irishmen were asked to fight on England's side. Many of them did, and fought bravely. But the new patriots would not. At their meetings, they made their intentions clear. We fight for neither king nor Kaiser, but Ireland. Patrick Pearse and his friends formed a secret plan to rise up and free the city of Dublin from the hated English rule. They knew that in the end their small forces could never really capture Dublin from the British Army, but they longed to show the English that some Irishmen were prepared to fight for their country. They were even ready to die in this tremendous gesture. He and his friends were not soldiers, not men of blood. They were shopkeepers, poets, teachers, and trade union leaders. Patrick Pearse's brother William was with them, heart and soul. He was an art master at his brother's school. Joseph Plunkett, a tall, frail man who suffered from tuberculosis, got up from his sickbed to join the campaign. The date was fixed for Easter Sunday, 1916. Because the Patriots were ordinary people, not professional soldiers, they were not the best organized army in the world. Pearse sent a letter to each of his men telling them what they had to do, and the instructions were hardly adequate for a long armed rising. You will provide yourself with a bicycle, a street map of Dublin City, a road map of the Dublin district, and a field message book. You will carry full arms and ammunition, full service equipment, including overcoat, and rations for 8 hours. As well as this, there was confusion over the instructions to mobilize, and far fewer men turned out for Pearse than he had expected. Dublin was peaceful and unsuspecting. Few British troops were in the city because of the war with Germany. Dubliners hardly turned their heads when they heard the volunteers marching. But this was no practice drill. The leaders found out through the city and occupied key positions, declaring that they had captured them from the British. Pearse marched his detachment here to the GPO and into the building. His men told the startled officials that they were taking it over. Then Patrick Pearse came out with a piece of paper, and standing on this very spot, he read it to the people outside. The Provisional Government of the Irish Republic, to the people of Ireland, Irish men and Irish women. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies, to be sovereign and indefeasible. By this proclamation, Patrick Pearse and the other leaders who signed it declared the English mastery of Ireland at an end, and the Irish Republic founded. The English were taken by surprise and quickly rushed in troops. Parts of Dublin became battlefields. Within days, the volunteer strongholds were surrounded, and with only 8 hours' rations, they'd long since run out of food. The British worked methodically to crush the rising, and on the Friday, the GPO was set on fire by the shelling. Patrick Pearse, Joseph Plunkett and his men were forced to leave. By now, Joseph Plunkett was ill and exhausted. After the fire, the GPO was a gutted wreck, and the other strongholds of the volunteers were destroyed or surrounded. Pearse made his decision and surrendered to the English commander. It was the only thing to do. He knew that by surrender, the lives of his men might be saved, though maybe not his own. Dubliners were horrified at the damage done to their city. They had not asked for the rising and were furiously angry. As the prisoners were rounded up, people jeered and threw stones at them. There was little hope for the leaders. Because it was wartime, they were tried by army court-martial. They were condemned to death and were taken to this jail to await their execution. This was Kilmainham, an age-old jail for political prisoners. Today, Kilmainham is kept as a museum. It hasn't been used as a jail now for 50 years. Countless Irish patriots from previous uprisings have been imprisoned here, and here it was that the Pearses, Joseph Plunkett and many others were brought. Some of the volunteers who were under sentence of death are still alive to tell the tale. One of them, J Brennan, then 26, now 83, showed me his cell.
This is the cell that I was in.
How do you feel, Mr. Brennan, being back in here again?
I've been in it many times since then.
So you got used to it? What were the conditions like?
Well, they weren't pleasant, I can assure you.
And what sort of furniture did you have in your cell?
Nothing. No bed, no table, no chair, no light.
What did you sleep on, just on the floor?
On the floor. Took off our boots and put our hand on our boots and snoozed off.
What about food?
Well, prison food is not nice, especially in the days I'm talking about.
Could you hear the shots in the morning when your comrades were being executed?
I did, yeah, without a doubt.
How did you feel when you heard
Well, I don't know who's been executed.
Did word not go round the prison?
Well, there was no means of putting it around.
Now, when were you told that you were going to be shot?
Well, on the day, some days after we coming here, they opened that drawer there, and they told us that the findings in the court-martial was he's sentenced to death.
And then when were you told about the reprieve?
Oh, later in the day.
Oh, the same day?
Same day.
So you didn't really have that long to get adjusted to the idea that you were going to die, did you?
I was very much adjusted. I was very disappointed when they told me I was being commuted to penal servitude.
Why were you disappointed?
Well, I didn't expect anything else but death.
All the leaders who signed the proclamation were condemned to death, and none of them was reprieved. Here in the chapel at Kilmainham, Joseph Plunkett was granted his last request. He was engaged to a beautiful and devoted girl called Grace Gifford. The day before Joseph was to be executed, she was brought to the prison, and at 8 o'clock in the evening, she and Joseph Plunkett were married. Immediately after the ceremony, Grace was taken away and Joseph was returned to his cell. They met once more in the early hours of the next morning. Once again, Grace was brought to the prison, and she and Joseph were allowed to talk to each other in his cell for about 10 minutes, while the soldiers stood by. Then they parted, and an hour later, Joseph was taken out and shot. His wife never remarried and bore the name of Plunkett for the rest of her life. The cells of the condemned leaders were along this corridor in an older wing of the jail. This was the cell where Patrick Pearse awaited his death. His last wish to see his mother was not granted, and so the night before he was executed, he wrote her one last letter. My dearest mother, I have been hoping up to now that it would be possible for me to see you again, but it does not seem possible. Goodbye, dear, dear mother. I have just received Holy Communion. I am happy, except for the great grief of parting from you. This is the death I should have asked for if God had given me the choice of all deaths, to die a soldier's death for Ireland and for freedom. We have done right. People will say hard things of us now, but later on they will praise us. Do not grieve for all this, but think of it as a sacrifice which God asked of me and of you. Goodbye again, dear, dear mother. May God bless you for your great love for me and for your great faith, and may he remember all that you have so bravely suffered. I hope soon to see Papa, and in a little while we shall all be together again. I have not words to tell of my love of you, and how my heart yearns to you all. I will call to you in my heart at the last moment. Your son, Pat. Those last moments came here. The 14 men were shot in this small prison yard with high walls, where the shooting could not be seen from the windows of the cells. The men weren't all executed at the same time, but for 5 days, either 2 or 3 were shot at dawn. And the men stood here where the cross is now. The firing squad over there in the middle of the yard. The last to be shot was James Connolly. He'd been badly wounded in the fighting and was brought to the jail in an ambulance. He was shot in another corner of the yard, strapped to a chair. The rising was over, and at first it seemed as though it had failed. The leaders were dead, and the Republic had lasted only 6 days. But then a strange thing happened. News of the leader's brave death spread quickly through Dublin, and indeed the sound of the shots could be heard outside the jail every morning. People began to feel differently about them. They no longer jeered at the Republic as an impossible dream and began to realize that perhaps soon Ireland could become free and independent. The British, by that long drawn-out week of executions, had themselves made certain of the success of the rising. Today, the graves of the volunteer leaders can be seen at the cemetery of Arbor Hill. It has a peaceful atmosphere, so different from the violence of 1916.
Good morning.
It's a communal grave, and the names of the 14 men are simply inscribed around the edge. Patrick Pearse, William Pearse, Joseph Plunkett, James Connolly and the rest are all national heroes now. Their graves are honoured, and above them flies the flag of the Irish Republic, which they died fighting for. Irish children are taught to remember them and the words of Patrick Pearse. Life springs from death, and from the graves of patriot men and women spring living nations.